Over the years, MS Teamworks has shared different perspectives on MS from patients, care partners, family members, and healthcare professionals. Guided by our mantra, I have MS, I have a team, I have a future, we are proud to share new messages of hope and inspiration with the MS community.
I have MS.
I'm on your team.
I have a future.
My name is Patty Bobrick, and I'm a physical therapist at the Orlando Health MS Center in Orlando, Florida. And my role on the MS team is to evaluate individuals with MS in a lot of different areas. I look at flexibility, I look at strength, balance, mobility, and most importantly, functional skills. I take that information, I talk to the patients and the families and discuss what their goals and their expectations are. And together with the medical team, we come up with a plan of care. And then I provide interventions to have them reach their goals. Another large component of my job is education. So I'm there to educate on symptom management strategies, on health and wellness issues, not only related to MS, but healthy living in general. You can have a diagnosis of MS and still be healthy. I'm really lucky to be part of a team that has everyone's best interest, looking out for each other. That way the patient can get the most comprehensive care at one center. Some of the common challenges that individuals living with MS face when they're out in the community or when they're traveling has to do with two things in my eyes. One is the symptoms that they have regarding their own personal journey with MS, and the other is accessibility. So when I look at somebody moving around in their community, I take a look at their symptoms. So let's say, for instance, they're heat sensitive. So we'll have discussions about how they can manage that symptom when they're out in the community. For instance, my clinic is in Orlando. You park your car in the parking lot, you're in for an appointment for 2 hours, and you come out and the car is 200 degrees. So you have to be prepared for that. So careful planning, would include putting a little Playmate cooler in the car and having an iced drink and a cold towel. Or if you can afford it, a remote start so the air's on. If you're traveling, you may want to choose your destination and the time of year you go there. You may not want to choose a location that is really at the peak of its heat. You may choose an off-season, maybe when it's a little bit cooler, so that you are prepared for the heat, particularly if you're very sensitive. If we look at another symptom as fatigue, the suggestions I usually have for that is that you give yourself plenty of time. Stress and the anxiety of being late or being rushed are real energy zappers, and you just don't perform well under those conditions. So making sure that whether you're traveling to an appointment in town or whether you're getting to the airport, give yourself plenty of time. Also schedule yourself rest breaks whenever you can. If you're going on a car trip, make sure that every hour and a half you get out, you stretch, you move around, use the restroom if you are having bladder issues, and that way you won't get to your destination and be fully exhausted. When it comes to accessibility issues, you want to make sure that you're doing your homework ahead of time. So you want to call to make sure that your needs will be met. Are they able to get into the building? Is there handicap parking close? What does the hotel room look like? Does it have a roll-in shower, or is it just a grab bar and a tub shower? So asking lots of questions so that you know that you're not going to run into any snags is really important. You'd also like to check with your doctor before you do any big trips so that you have all of your medications, you have a note if you're carrying injectables, and just that you have a plan if something goes awry medically and you're not in your home location. There are several laws in place that individuals with disabilities, and particularly people with MS, should be aware of. Some of the older laws was the Rehab Act. It was in the 70s. And it provided for accommodations for federal programs, including transportation, which was a big deal because we didn't have that before then. But there was no funding attached to it, so it didn't have much bite to it. The biggest one, and the one that has the most protection these days, are the Americans with Disability Act It was signed in 1990, and it offers several levels of protection and rights for individuals with disabilities. It has several sections. The first section, or title as it's called, deals with employment, discrimination against individuals with disability, and accommodations for employment. Title II has to do actually with the structural and architectural designs of accessibility for public buildings. It also talks about public access for transportation. So buses have to have accessible designs on them. Light rail has to have accessible designs on them. The third title has to do with public accommodations like hotels, restaurants, recreation facilities. So it spells out what needs to be done. But we're only talking about new buildings or buildings that are being renovated. So if a building has been built and it's not being renovated, or if a building has a few employees and it would be a financial strain to, say, put an elevator in for that company, they're not mandated to do that. So there may be some areas, some buildings that you'll be faced with that are not accessible because they don't fall under the ADA coverage. Maintaining realistic expectations is key for someone when it comes to accessibility. We have some standards and we have guidelines, but it may not be to your specific needs. That's why I ask people to always be advocates for themselves and ask lots of questions, because if the accommodation can be made for you, then people are often very willing to do that for you. But there'll be situations where you've planned for the best and the worst happens. You can be in a building where you need to be on the third floor and the elevator is out. So, we have to kind of know that the world isn't perfect and that everything isn't accessible. Also keep in mind, when we're talking about the ADA and accessibility, we're only talking about the United States. If you're traveling outside of the United States, it's a whole different ball of wax. So, you want to call ahead again and find out. A lot of places don't have curb cuts. They have really rocky cobblestone streets that you might have to negotiate. So it's really important to kind of understand what environment you may be going into so that you can really be prepared for that. I would love to talk to you about traveling with a service animal. It's a passion of mine. The ADA protects you with traveling with a service dog. It does not cover other species of service animals. So if you have a service dog, they have to be able to provide a task for you. An individual can ask you, does your service animal, is it required because of a disability? They can't ask you what your disability is. And they can ask you what type of work or task does the dog do for you. And those are the only two questions someone can ask you of your service dog when you're looking for accessibility. There are many different types of service dogs. There's hearing dogs, there's seizure dogs, there's skilled companion dogs, and those all fall under the ADA. Unfortunately, it's easy now these days to go on the internet and download a vest and a certificate to say, I'm a service dog. So there's a lot of fudging or fraud we don't have a national standard for a service dog, and there is work towards that. So there is some abuse in that, people bringing their pets on planes and they're not well behaved. It is the law that even if there is a no pet policy in a building, that your service animal, your service dog, is allowed in that building. That's traveling in the United States. If you're traveling outside the United States, you're going to have to call to see exactly what the rules and regulations are there. I have a really wonderful success story of a gentleman and his wife who their son lives overseas and was married, and they adopted a son. And the grandparents wanted desperately to meet their new grandson, but it was going to be a big trip for him. He's a full-time wheelchair user, manual wheelchair, and it's an 18-hour flight. So he came into therapy, he was very, very good, and we discussed the trip and we discussed what he might be facing. He felt he didn't have enough endurance to propel his wheelchair, so we worked on his endurance. We also worked on bumping up curbs in his wheelchair and bumping along like cobblestone because we thought that maybe he was going to be faced with that. We also worked on transferring into really small cars because he was concerned that the taxis there were going to be really small. So we worked on transfers in small spaces. We worked really hard on breaking down his wheelchair quickly and saying which are the most expensive parts, so you want to protect those. We also put together a little safety repair kit for his wheelchair in case he blew a tire there and had to make some adjustments on it. We also talked about the trip in general, about how long the trip was. So they flew from Florida to California, and they took a couple days there so they could rest and recover. And then they did the second leg of the trip. And they told their son that there was to be nothing on their calendar the first couple days when they arrived, except maybe some family time. And the same thing on the way back when they arrived back in the States, that they didn't put anything on the calendar for that first week that they were back so they could rest and recover. They were thrilled with the trip. They had a very successful trip. They felt that they were well prepared, and it was wonderful for them, not only as a success personally, but to be with their family and meet their new grandson was just so rewarding for them. The main thing that I want people who have watched this video to remember is that you can do it. It might take a little extra planning, it might take a little extra legwork, but it is an important part of life, and it's important for your quality of life. If you want to travel, if you want to explore, then you should. Use a disabled travel agency if you feel you can't make the arrangements yourself. There's a couple great resources: the Society for Accessible Travel and Hospitality, SATH.org, and also Mobility International USA, MIUSA.org. Those are some good places to start to get some information. My main take-home point is go and enjoy. Live your life.